In the heart of Europe lies a nation unlike any other, a land of mountains and miracles, a place where centuries of war surrounded it, yet it chose peace, from ancient tribes to global power. This is the untold story of Switzerland, the silent giant of history. Prehistoric Switzerland and the First Peoples, 20,000 BCE, 500 BCE, long before Switzerland became a nation of peace, prosperity, and precision. It was a land carved by ice, rivers, and towering mountains. During the last ice age, glaciers covered most of the region. As the ice slowly retreated, it revealed valleys, lakes, and fertile plains, landscapes that would one day shape the destiny of millions. The first humans arrived over 20,000 years ago, following herds in the rhythm of the seasons. They lived in caves near the Alps, leaving behind stone tools, fire pits, and the earliest signs of survival in this harsh environment. As the climate warmed, new communities settled around lakes like Zurich, Geneva, and Neuchâtel. They built extraordinary stilt houses, raised over water to protect themselves from floods and predators. These floating villages are among the most remarkable archaeological treasures in Europe. Over thousands of years, Switzerland became a crossroads, a place where different peoples traveled, traded, and clashed. By 2000 BCE, bronze tools appeared. Weapons grew sharper, settlements grew larger. Farmers cultivated grains and raised livestock, marking the beginnings of organized society. But the most defining transformation came around 500 BCE with the arrival of the Celts, known locally as the Helvetii. They were warriors, farmers, and craftsmen. They brought new languages, new religions, and new cultural traditions. Their villages dotted the valleys, while their hill forts rose above the plains. They traded with Rome, defended their lands against rivals, and created one of the earliest cultural identities in the region. These were the first people to give Switzerland a name, Helvetia. The Helvetii shaped the land, but soon a powerful empire to the south would change everything. Rome was coming. Rome arrives Helvetia under the empire, 58 BCE, 400 CE. The world of the Helvetii was about to collide with a force unlike anything they had ever known. To the south, an empire was rising, disciplined, relentless, and hungry for expansion. In 58 BCE, the Helvetii made a bold decision. Tired of pressure from rival tribes and limited land, they attempted a massive migration westward, a journey of hundreds of thousands of people, entire families, carrying everything they owned. But someone stood in their way, Julius Caesar. He intercepted the Helvetii near modern-day France. In a brutal clash, the Helvetii were defeated and forced back to their homeland. From that moment, Rome's influence over the region became inevitable. Soon, the territory fell under Roman control and was given a name that would echo for centuries, Provincia Helvetia. The Romans transformed the land. They built cities, roads, bridges, and fortified settlements. Trade routes connected Helvetia to the entire empire, from Spain to Greece, from Africa to Britain. Roman towns flourished. Aventicum, capital of Roman Helvetia; Vindonissa, a strategic military base; Augusta Raurica, a thriving commercial center near today's Basel. With Rome came new laws, new ideas, and new gods. Temples rose alongside Celtic shrines. Latin blended with local languages. Bathhouses, amphitheaters, and markets brought Roman culture into everyday life. Helvetia became a model of order and prosperity. Farmers produced grain for Roman troops. Craftsmen forged weapons, jewelry, and tools traded across the continent. Roman soldiers guarded the Rhine frontier, turning Switzerland into a strategic northern shield for the empire. But deep in the heart of the Alps, something uniquely Swiss endured. Local traditions mixed with Roman customs, creating a blended identity, neither fully Celtic nor fully Roman. For centuries, Helvetia prospered. But by the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Roman world began to crack. Germanic tribes pushed against the borders. The empire weakened. Frontier forts fell. Trade collapsed. Slowly, Rome withdrew. Its legions marched south, leaving behind empty roads, abandoned fortresses, and a land on the edge of transformation. Helvetia entered a new age, one of uncertainty, migration, and shifting power. The Romans had come and gone, but the foundations they built would shape Switzerland for centuries to come. Next, new peoples would arrive, Alemanni, Burgundians, and Franks, bringing Europe into the early medieval world. The early Middle Ages, Alemanni, Franks, and the first Swiss identity, 400–1291. As the Roman Empire crumbled, silence fell across Helvetia. Once busy roads grew empty. The great cities of the Romans slowly faded, and in the shadows of the Alps, new peoples began to move in. From the north came the Alemanni, Germanic tribes searching for new lands. They settled in the plains, riversides, and forests of northern Switzerland. Their language, customs, and farming style reshaped the region. To the west, a different people arrived, the Burgundians, who made their home in what is now Romandy. They brought their own traditions and eventually blended with the powerful Franks, the rising force of medieval Europe. For centuries, Switzerland became a mosaic, Germanic culture in the north, Latin and Burgundian influence in the west, Roman traditions lingering in the south. The Alps, instead of dividing people, became bridges, passages used by traders, monks, and armies. This crossroads would be vital to Switzerland's future. By the early Middle Ages, the land was firmly part of the Frankish Empire. Under rulers like Charlemagne, monasteries and churches flourished. Monks preserved knowledge, copied texts, and taught new farming methods. Villages grew into towns, forts became castles. Yet life was harsh. Feudal lords controlled the land, peasants worked the fields under heavy taxes. Foreign powers, Germans, Italians, Burgundians, fought for influence over the Alpine valleys. But in these mountains something unusual began to grow, a sense of independence. The people living in remote valleys and rugged passes learned to rely on themselves. No king could easily control them, no army could easily reach them, and no lord could easily dominate them. Local communities governed their own affairs. They held Landsgemeinde, open-air assemblies where free men voted on decisions. It was primitive democracy, long before the idea existed elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Habsburgs, one of Europe's most powerful families, expanded their control across the region. Their taxes rose, their influence deepened, their ambitions threatened the freedoms the mountain communities cherished. By the late 1200s, tensions reached a breaking point, and in three small regions, Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, local leaders met in secret. They swore an oath of mutual defense, an oath to protect their freedom from outside rule, an oath that would change the history of Europe. This was the beginning of the Swiss Confederation, a small alliance of farmers and herdsmen, surrounded by mighty empires, would soon rise against one of the most powerful families in Europe. Next came battles, legends, and the birth of a nation. The birth of the Swiss Confederation, 1291 to 1500, high in the heart of the Alps, a war for freedom was brewing. Three small mountain communities, Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, lived under the tightening grip of the rising Habsburg dynasty. Their forests were taxed, their trade routes controlled, their people judged by foreign officials who cared little for their customs. Whispers spread across the valleys. More soldiers are coming, more taxes, more demands. The people of the mountains had endured hardship for centuries. Harsh winters, rocky soil, isolation. But what they could not endure was losing their freedom. And so in the summer of 1291, as the threat of Habsburg domination grew, leaders from the three cantons met in secret. At Rütli Meadow, overlooking the vast Lake Lucerne, they swore an oath that echoed across the mountains, to defend one another, to resist foreign rule, to choose their own fate. This was the Federal Charter of 1291, the foundation of Switzerland. But freedom would not come peacefully. The Habsburgs, powerful lords of Central Europe, refused to let the Confederates slip from their grasp. Their knights marched into the mountains, armored in steel, confident in their power. They expected an easy victory. Instead, they met the Swiss, farmers, blacksmiths, shepherds, men who fought not for gold, not for glory, but for the land beneath their feet. In 1315, at the Battle of Morgarten, the Habsburg army advanced in tight formation along a narrow mountain pass. But the Swiss were waiting above, hidden in the cliffs, among boulders and trees, When the moment came, they struck like an avalanche. Logs, stones, and volleys of weapons crashed onto the knights below. The Austrian formation shattered. Panicked soldiers fell into the lake. Others broke and fled. The unthinkable had happened. A small mountain alliance had defeated one of Europe's most powerful families. The victory electrified the Alpine valleys. More cantons joined the pact: Lucerne, Zurich, Glarus, Zug, and Bern. What began as a desperate act of resistance grew into a strong confederation, united not by a king but by shared independence. Yet unity did not erase danger. Throughout the 14th century, the Habsburgs returned again and again, seeking revenge and control. The Swiss fought them in Sempach, in Naples, and in countless smaller skirmishes. In each battle, heavily armored knights faced men armed with pikes, halberds, and unbreakable resolve. Legend tells of Arnold von Winkelried at Sempach, a Swiss warrior who sacrificed his life by throwing himself onto the Austrian spears, clearing a path for his comrades to break the enemy line. Whether myth or truth, his story became the symbol of a nation willing to give everything for freedom. By the late 1400s, the Swiss Confederation had become a respected force in Europe. Their disciplined infantry terrified invaders. Their alliance strengthened. Their independence grew more undeniable. But perhaps the most remarkable thing was this: while kingdoms across Europe fought for thrones and crowns, the Swiss built something different, a pact of equals, where communities governed themselves, councils debated openly, and power came not from royalty, but from the people. By 1500, the Swiss Confederation was no longer a fragile alliance hidden in the Alps. It was a rising nation, proud, resilient, united by a promise made on a quiet meadow 2 centuries earlier. And the world was beginning to notice. Switzerland in the Renaissance and Reformation, 1500-1700. The dawn of the 16th century brought new winds to Europe, winds of art, science, discovery, but also of conflict, doubt, and radical change. And in the heart of the Alps, Switzerland stood at a crossroads. The Swiss Confederation was stronger than ever. Their soldiers were feared across Europe, elite mercenaries known for their discipline and bravery. Kings hired them, popes trusted them. The reputation of the Swiss warrior spread far beyond the mountains. But there was something brewing at home, something far more powerful than any army. Ideas. Whispers spread through taverns, marketplaces, and church steps. Whispers questioning old traditions, old rules, old authorities. The Renaissance had reached the Alps, bringing not only art and learning, but a new courage to challenge the established order. In 1519, a priest named Huldrych Zwingli arrived in Zurich. He was not a warrior, not a king, not a noble, yet his words would ignite a revolution fiercer than any battle. Zwingli preached that faith should be simple, that the church should return to its roots, that people should read the Bible themselves, not rely on distant authorities. His ideas resonated deeply with Swiss cities growing wealthier, more educated, and more impatient with old constraints. Change came fast. Images were removed from churches, Mass was reformed, monasteries were closed. Power shifted from religious leaders to local councils. The Reformation had taken root, and Switzerland became one of its epicenters. But not everyone agreed. Rural cantons, more conservative and deeply tied to tradition, resisted these new teachings. Old alliances strained. Neighbors clashed with neighbors. The Confederation, once united against foreign threats, now fought itself. The conflict erupted in 1531 at the Battle of Kappel. Zwingli marched to defend the Reformation and fell on the battlefield. His death shook the movement, but it didn't end it. Far to the west, another figure was rising, a scholar, a refugee, a man whose writings would influence the world for centuries. John Calvin in Geneva. Calvin transformed the city into a center of learning, discipline, and faith. People traveled from across Europe to study his ideas of self-governance, moral responsibility, and a community built on shared principles. Geneva became the school of Europe, shaping not only religion but political philosophy. From its presses came books that spread across continents. Meanwhile, Switzerland continued to evolve. The Confederation grew richer through trade, banking, and craftsmanship. Clockmakers perfected their art, farmers improved their lands, cities expanded behind walls that kept their independence safe. Yet beneath the prosperity lay tension, Catholic and Protestant cantons constantly negotiating, balancing, and occasionally fighting. And so the Swiss Confederation forged a new identity, not unified by one religion, not dominated by one ruler, but held together by a fragile, hard-won agreement to coexist. While Europe plunged into brutal religious wars, France, Germany, the Netherlands, the Swiss chose a different path: neutrality, pragmatism, and a focus on survival over conquest. By 1700, Switzerland was no longer simply a nation of mountain fighters. It had become a land of ideas, faith, and innovation, a patchwork of cultures learning, often painfully, to live side by side. The Renaissance and Reformation had reshaped the Confederation. It emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the delicate balance that held it together. And soon new challenges, revolutions, empires, and the birth of modern Europe would test that balance like never before. The Enlightenment, French invasion, and the birth of modern Switzerland, 1700–1848. The 18th century dawned with a quiet tension in the air. Across Europe, kings ruled with absolute power. But philosophers whispered new ideas: liberty, reason, equality, democracy. These ideas traveled through universities, coffee houses, and public squares, and they reached the valleys and cities of Switzerland. The Confederation of Cantons, still divided by religion and tradition, also felt the pull of change. Merchants prospered, education expanded, newspapers spread fresh debates. A new Swiss identity was slowly forming, one that looked beyond local borders. But the storm that transformed Switzerland was not born in the Alps. It erupted in Paris. The French Revolution of 1789 sent shock waves across Europe. Kings trembled, empires braced for rebellion, and Switzerland, with its wealth, strategic passes, and fragile political balance, became a target. In 1798, French troops marched across the Swiss frontier. Canton after canton fell. The old Confederation, centuries old, built on alliances and local freedoms, collapsed. In its place, the French created the Helvetic Republic, a centralized, modern state, modeled after revolutionary France. For the first time, Switzerland had a single constitution, but this new order came at a cost. Taxes rose, foreign soldiers occupied towns, traditional councils were abolished, local autonomy, the soul of Swiss identity, vanished overnight. Rebellions exploded in the countryside. Swiss fought Swiss. The land descended into chaos, and in the center of this turmoil stood one figure whose name would shape Europe: Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon admired Swiss soldiers, Swiss discipline, the stability of the Alps, but he also understood the Confederation's deep divisions. So, in 1803, he imposed the Act of Mediation, restoring autonomy to the cantons, but keeping Switzerland under French influence. It was a compromise, unpopular to some, necessary to others, but it brought peace. For a decade, Switzerland rebuilt, trade returned, schools expanded, roads improved, and a new generation grew up with a sense of shared Swiss identity, stronger than before. Then in 1815, Napoleon fell. Europe gathered at the Congress of Vienna to redraw the continent's map, and Switzerland stood at a new crossroads. The great powers declared Switzerland permanently neutral. It would not join wars, its borders would be respected, and its passes would no longer be battlegrounds for empires. Neutrality became more than a policy, it became the heart of Swiss identity. But this neutrality could not hide deeper problems. The Confederation was still divided between conservatives and liberals, between old traditions and modern reforms. Cities wanted progress, rural cantons demanded stability. The tension erupted in 1847 in a brief civil conflict known as the Sonderbund War. For the first time in centuries, Swiss soldiers fought one another, not foreign armies. Yet the war lasted only a few weeks. Few lives were lost, and from its ashes came something extraordinary: a decision to unite. In 1848, Switzerland adopted a new federal constitution. the birth of the modern Swiss state. Power was shared, rights were protected, the national government was strengthened, but the cantons kept their autonomy. It was a balance as precise as a Swiss clock. Industrial Switzerland, wealth, railways, and the rise of a modern economy, 1848-1914. The year is 1848. As Europe trembles with revolutions, Switzerland stands reborn, a newly unified federal state, but no one could yet imagine the transformation that lay ahead. A transformation that would turn a quiet alpine nation into one of the world's most advanced economies. It began with movement of ideas, movement of machines, movement of people. The Industrial Revolution, sweeping across Europe, arrived in Switzerland with a force that reshaped every valley, river, and city. Factories rose along rivers whose currents powered the first machines. Textile mills spun cotton and silk that traveled far beyond the Alps. Engineers experimented with chemistry, precision mechanics, and watchmaking, setting the foundation for Swiss innovation. Cities grew: Zurich, Basel, Geneva. Once medieval towns, they surged with life, workers, and opportunity. But the most dramatic change came from steel rails stretching across the rugged mountains. Railways. The first trains cut through the countryside like iron arrows. Tunnels drilled through cliffs. Bridges spanned vast gorges. With every track laid, Switzerland shrank. Isolated cantons became connected. Goods traveled in hours instead of days. People moved freely across the nation for the first time in history. And then came the boldest vision of all, the Gotthard Railway. Engineers looked at the map of Europe and dared to dream. A rail line piercing the mighty Alps, linking northern and southern Europe through the heart of Switzerland. The project was brutal. Workers endured freezing winters, deadly explosions, and dangerous shifts underground. But in 1882, after years of sacrifice, the Gotthard Tunnel opened, the longest in the world at the time. Switzerland was no longer a landlocked mountain nation. It became the crossroads of a continent. As rails connected the country to the world, another industry quietly emerged, an industry that would define Switzerland's international reputation: banking. Stability, neutrality, and political peace attracted wealth from across Europe. Swiss banks gained a reputation for trust, privacy, and precision. Over time, they became global financial pillars. Meanwhile, Swiss scientists and entrepreneurs advanced new industries. Nestlé revolutionized nutrition. Pharmaceutical research bloomed in Basel. Watchmakers perfected mechanical artistry that dazzled the world. Peace allowed creativity to flourish. Neutrality attracted thinkers, artists, and businesses. The Swiss quality of discipline, born from centuries of survival in the mountains, became a trademark recognized worldwide. But prosperity had its cost. Factories demanded long hours. Children worked in harsh conditions. Cities struggled with overcrowding. Debates erupted over workers' rights, wages, and political reform. And through it all, Switzerland remained determined to stay united, to preserve the balance between progress and tradition, industry and nature, modernity and independence. By the early 20th century, Switzerland had transformed completely. It was no longer a patchwork of rural communities surviving among peaks and valleys. It had become a modern nation, industrial, wealthy, educated, connected, a nation ready to step into the global spotlight. But the world around it was changing, and soon a storm unlike any before would test Switzerland's unity, neutrality, and courage. A storm called World War. Industrial Switzerland, wealth, railways, and the rise of a modern economy, 1848-1914. The year is 1848. As Europe trembles with revolutions, Switzerland stands reborn, a newly unified federal state. But no one could yet imagine the transformation that lay ahead. A transformation that would turn a quiet alpine nation into one of the world's most advanced economies. It began with movement of ideas, movement of machines, movement of people. The Industrial Revolution, sweeping across Europe, arrived in Switzerland with a force that reshaped every valley, river, and city. Factories rose along rivers whose currents powered the first machines. Textile mills spun cotton and silk that traveled far beyond the Alps. Engineers experimented with chemistry, precision mechanics, and watchmaking, setting the foundation for Swiss innovation. Cities grew: Zurich, Basel, Geneva. Once medieval towns, they surged with life, workers, and opportunity. But the most dramatic change came from steel rails stretching across the rugged mountains. Railways. The first trains cut through the countryside like iron arrows. Tunnels drilled through cliffs. Bridges spanned vast gorges. With every track laid, Switzerland shrank. Isolated cantons became connected. Goods traveled in hours instead of days. People moved freely across the nation for the first time in history. And then came the boldest vision of all, the Gotthard Railway. Engineers looked at the map of Europe and dared to dream. A rail line piercing the mighty Alps, linking northern and southern Europe through the heart of Switzerland. The project was brutal. Workers endured freezing winters, deadly explosions, and dangerous shifts underground. But in 1882, after years of sacrifice, the Gotthard Tunnel opened, the longest in the world at the time. Switzerland was no longer a landlocked mountain nation. It became the crossroads of a continent. As rails connected the country to the world, another industry quietly emerged, an industry that would define Switzerland's international reputation: banking. Stability, neutrality, and political peace attracted wealth from across Europe. Swiss banks gained a reputation for trust, privacy, and precision. Over time, they became global financial pillars. Meanwhile, Swiss scientists and entrepreneurs advanced new industries. Nestlé revolutionized nutrition. Pharmaceutical research bloomed in Basel. Watchmakers perfected mechanical artistry that dazzled the world. Peace allowed creativity to flourish. Neutrality attracted thinkers, artists, and businesses. The Swiss quality of discipline, born from centuries of survival in the mountains, became a trademark recognized worldwide. But prosperity had its cost. Factories demanded long hours. Children worked in harsh conditions. Cities struggled with overcrowding. Debates erupted over workers' rights, wages, and political reform. And through it all, Switzerland remained determined to stay united, to preserve the balance between progress and tradition, industry and nature, modernity and independence. By the early 20th century, Switzerland had transformed completely. It was no longer a patchwork of rural communities surviving among peaks and valleys. It had become a modern nation, industrial, wealthy, educated, connected, a nation ready to step into the global spotlight. But the world around it was changing, and soon a storm unlike any before would test Switzerland's unity, neutrality, and courage, a storm called World War. Switzerland in the 21st century: technology, globalization, challenges, and future, 2000-2025. The 21st century arrived with unprecedented speed, a world connected by satellites, fiber optics, and global finance, a world of opportunities and dangers, of innovation and uncertainty. Switzerland entered this new age with the same resilience that had carried it through millennia. It was a nation that had survived empires, wars, and revolutions, now facing a world that changed every day. Technology transformed daily life. Cities like Zurich and Geneva became global hubs for finance, research, and innovation. Startups flourished in biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, and clean energy. Universities attracted talent from across the globe, turning Switzerland into a center of knowledge and progress. Tourism boomed. The Alps, once a refuge and battlefield, now welcome millions seeking snow, adventure, and serenity. Historic cities thrived, blending medieval charm with modern design. Swiss culture, from chocolate to watches, music to design, captivated the world. But prosperity also brought challenges. Immigration grew. Globalization required new policies and cooperation. Switzerland faced economic fluctuations, climate change, and political debates over neutrality, trade, and sustainability. Yet the Swiss people adapted. Direct democracy empowered citizens to vote on critical issues, shaping the nation with every election. Neutrality remained a cornerstone of foreign policy. Switzerland avoided conflicts while serving as a global mediator, hosting international talks and humanitarian efforts. By the 2010s, Switzerland had become a leader in sustainability, innovation, and human development. Smart cities, clean energy initiatives, and cutting-edge research defined the era. The country balanced tradition with modernity, honoring centuries of history while shaping the future. And then came the global crises, pandemics, economic uncertainty, and geopolitical tension. Even in uncertainty, Switzerland's strengths held firm: adaptability, stability, and the will of its people. By 2025, Switzerland stood as a nation of contrasts and harmony: ancient mountains and high-tech cities, centuries-old traditions and modern values, neutrality and global influence. A small country with a giant impact. From prehistoric tribes to Helvetii warriors, from medieval alliances to the Swiss Confederation, through revolutions, wars, industrialization, and global integration, Switzerland's story is one of endurance, innovation, and unity. A nation shaped by its geography, its people, and its choices. A nation that looks to the future, proud of its past, ready to continue writing its remarkable story.